Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you again for the latest episode of Get on the Grid with Chessie Roberts. My guest tonight is Harold W. Becker, and he and I would like for you to join us in aligning with the energies of co-creation so that this show gives you the best information to your highest good and best outcome. Welcome, Harold. I'm so happy to have you with us today.
Well, it's a delight and honor to be on your show and also talking with your audience. I appreciate the opportunity.
I've got an awesome audience. I know they're just going to love you. For those of you who have not heard of Harold before, Harold W. Becker is dedicated to assisting others with his powerful and insightful understanding of love and life. He's the author of several books, including Internal Power, 7 Doorways to Self-Discovery, Unconditional Love, An Unlimited Way of Being, and Unconditional Love Is. He holds an MBA from the University of Tampa, and since 1990, he's devoted his energy to raising the awareness of individuals, communities, and humanity through his consulting company, Internal Insights. In 2000, he founded and is president of the internationally active nonprofit organization, the Love Foundation, Inc., with the vision of inspiring people to love unconditionally. He also founded Global Love Day, held annually on May 1st, as a celebration of our humanity. Harold shares his gifts through books, speaking, radio and television guest appearances, seminars, and a PBS special, and through various social media channels. He currently resides in Orlando, Florida. And again, welcome, Harold. I think this is going to be a very timely topic. Unconditional love.
Well, yes.
Unconditional love is one of my hot buttons, so I'm just thrilled to have somebody here to talk with about it. So can you explain what that is and how we get there?
Sure. In 2 seconds flat.
Sure, yes.
No,
I'm known for questions like that, so I'm at you.
Well, I always get a kind of a kicker when the lead-up announcing the various things that I'm involved with. There's always this recurring theme of love, and particularly unconditional love. I wonder if this conversation will be just about that. Yes, actually it will be. And, part of, my explanation, definition of unconditional love goes back a bit to the late 80s, early 90s, which kind of triggered the onset of my awakening awareness that love is not only the question, the answer, and everything else. It is really, for me, the focal point of life, and not just the everyday commonly thrown around word of love, but truly the unconditional love. And it really comes from a shift in my life where I was doing everything right in the human sense. I was, doing the right career, the right pathway, banker, degrees, all that type of stuff, and yet I was really not happy with it. And something shifted inside to say that I needed to understand what happiness was, and that kind of led into a self-exploration, self-discovery, self-awareness, going in and really becoming aware of my own inner nature, my own inner thoughts and feelings, and really determining what my genuine dreams were, my heartfelt dreams. And one of the earliest experiences was in everything I looked at, this recurring theme of love kept coming up. And not having particularly a religious background, I didn't see it as being that, but I wanted to explore it. And that evolution of exploration created a definition and then created a life experience that I now share, going on over 25 years.
Very nice. I really like the fact that these revelations occur, and as they do, they teach us, or they open our eyes to question things that we've held as basic truths all of our lives, and that's where we start moving and growing and learning, is by asking ourselves these hard questions. And I get what you're talking about exactly. Not too long ago, actually, I was talking during meditation, and I asked them, what can we do to make all of this work? And they said, love yourself and love one another. And I said, well, what are the parameters of that? And they said there aren't any.
That's exactly true. And that was really the experience of diving into my own, again, I like the idea of the self-discovery, because it kind of leaves it very open and personal. And, in many ways, I can say in hindsight, I was remembering many aspects of myself, but at the time, It was much more benign and much more innate, where it was just this self-discovery and have a religious background per se. I mean, loosely left to my own with my upbringing, in my course of studies and basically reaching out for every piece of information I could. One of the things that I did do is I went and found a really nice book that summarized all the religions. And I was already aware of the idea of love, but I really wanted to understand the deeper essence of it, because I knew what's being bantered around in common society didn't seem to have any relevance to the love that was calling to my heart. Exactly. And this one particular book, after I read through every major religion, I realized that every major religion was based on some form of a master teacher, a teacher of some type of understanding, and that the religions were born out of that teaching. And after reading, all the major religions in this one particular compilation, and even the book itself never drew this conclusion. I did. I put the book down and I said, every teacher that has ever walked on the planet has only had a singular message, and it was one of love. And every religion should, therefore, in a way, be singularly focused on the idea of love, and yet this isn't the case. And I realized that if every teacher that has ever come on the planet through any wave or cycle of life on this planet and had a message, a reminder of love, then that seemed to be the thing to go focus. And I was very practical and pragmatic about it. I still am to this day, in the sense that I study, experience, explore, discover what love means in every moment. And that really became the waking part of my life focus, that, if it was all about love, if that was the major, at least through the religious circles, if that was the major message and the only real message, genuinely message, then that seemed like a real plausible, good place to start. And so taking all my banking background, my business background, and all that, that's where I started. I said, okay, this is beyond, whatever is being shown to us, and that, this is something that we go within and go to an inner exploration. And certainly, as you've already mentioned, the first place to start is with the total and unconditional self-acceptance, self-love, the unconditional love for self. And then from that point, once we've come to that understanding, everything else is, shall we just say, icing on the cake of life, that we now get to share the genuine true love that we have within. And that's been the way I've been living ever since. And I find it just obviously, as I like to share it in all various different formats, it is one of those things that I think I'm very passionate and compassionate about, because I do feel like this is the one singular thing that everybody seeks externally, and most of humanity doesn't realize it's already inside internally.
I would ask you at this point, Harold, don't you find that most people sort of have an aversion to self-love? There's something tripping us up there when we decide that, okay, we're going to experience and we're going to dig and we're going to find out what's going on and what's what. And when they get to that love yourself, it kind of stops them for a little bit. I know that it was an issue for me when I made this particular leap, if you will. I had started my own program, Evolution of Self, Journey into Body, Mind, Spirit Balance, and cooking along quite nicely. And all of a sudden I realized, oh, wait a minute, for all this to work really, really well, I have to like who I am. I have to love who I am. And that kind of made me stop and go, do I really? And ask the really hard questions. Do you have any advice for people who are sort of facing that particular monster down?
Well, and I can certainly speak from, again, hindsight. When I was going through this awakening process, it was an unfolding, and it really is still an unfolding to this day. That first initial phase, one of the things that I can say now I realize is that really nowhere in our society, and we can really go Western or Eastern centric, it really doesn't matter. There's not a conversation about love, and certainly, up until the point where I started to ask myself this question, no one had ever posed such a question, do I love myself unconditionally? In fact, one of my favorite things to do these days is to pose that question, because for many, if not most people, they've never even heard the question, much less given the answer any consideration. Right. So part of what we've been doing is, to put this question, in essence, out into the common dialogue so that we can explore, because everyone will have their own unique experience. You actually touched on one poignant piece that is a good place to start. So if someone in your audience, for example, is just hearing this question for the first time, beginning to wonder, beginning to go inside and say, well, gosh, do I really love myself unconditionally? First of all, lots of patience and lots of self-compassion, because this isn't something that is taught as life skills through school. So in many ways, anyone that's doing this is a pioneer. This is the first time we're doing it. And then the best next place, as you've already mentioned, is if answering the question, do I love myself unconditionally, is really so far out of the zone of comprehension, then start with a simple step. Do I like myself? And then start finding all the places where we like ourselves, because as we find places that we like ourselves, and as we find ourselves in a more compassionate, forgiving space of all the things that brought us to this moment, the unconditional love will reveal itself more and more as we progress through life. And a lot of people say, well, once you have this, everything should be rosy and keen. Well, that's not really the case. So what I chose to do was realizing that, typically speaking, unconditional love, for the most part in society, is either relegated to some divine prospect that is completely outside of our domain, or if we have an earthly companion of a dog, we kind of recognize unconditional love there. So it's really, humanly we see it as in one place or the other. But in ourselves, absolutely not. We talk about the unconditional love, say, of a mother, but a lot of times that's very conditional because there are lots of pains and sufferings going on in various stages of that. So this is something that is really genuinely self-exploration, self-reconnection. And we do it.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Something I think is very important, and it's that forgiveness. And my students and my clients and my listeners, I know they're rolling their eyes at me right now, but understand, people, that he said the patience word this time, not me. Patience, forgiveness, passion for yourself are huge. And that seems to be the triquetra of the trip up right there when people really get into this. And I think it's important that we understand that these things are doable and they are accessible and they are something that we need to aspire to, yeah?
And it's only a journey that we can take individually. We can learn lots of things from the people around us, but this is something that a person that is keenly interested in. It is a journey of the singular, although we are constantly surrounded with opportunities and friends all around us. The choice to love ourselves unconditionally, the choice to forgive ourselves unconditionally, and why I start with the internal aspect, the self-acceptance, the self-love, the self-forgiveness, is that, historically we do, as a culture, look outside ourselves for love. I mean, just listen to any radio station, and, 95% of the songs are about broken hearts and relationship, challenges and basically all the externalized versions of love, which are not the real genuine understandings of love. So in order to find this love, we have to go within because it's already there. And in that exploration, one of the things that is very helpful is to realize that whatever we have within, we give out. Whatever we give out comes back to us in full measure. So if we have love, for example, is within, which we all know we do because we're talking about it now, then that love is what we will share and love is what we will then receive in return. Well, it works the same way with anger, works the same way with guilt. If we have anger within, we're going to give out anger. There's a really good chance that we're going to experience anger back at our world. So it's a very practical understanding to recognize that whatever we have within is what we give out. So the best place to start is to realize, well, what kind of thoughts and feelings are we entertaining within? And what kind of emotions, what kind of memories, what kind of shames, guilts, worries, concerns are we spending a lot of our time focusing on in our inner conscious awareness? Because that's the place where we have power. And the power isn't in what we've done. It's in the power of the fact that we have choice over continuing to stay in that old energy or to recognize that we have the opportunity and choice in every moment to choose differently We can forgive the past because it is just, in fact, a memory. We can let go of the future because it does, in fact, take care of itself in its own way. And we can become more present in the moment. And I think that is probably the focal point of all of this, is to be more present in the moment, to recognize we have love within. That's when we restore ourselves back into our personal balance and our personal well-being. And that's when everything starts to line up and make sense. Up until that point, for me at least, it didn't. So yes, it is a trifecta, because you have to be patient to do this discovery and unfolding, and with some basic perspectives of understanding that the journey, not only does it make logical, pragmatic sense, it also unfolds in ways where our true dreams, our true heart's desires, not what everybody else is expecting of us or we think everybody's expecting of us, not what we are doing to conform to societal ways. This is a very different journey where we simply get in touch with ourselves for the sake of getting in touch with ourselves, and then our reality begins to evolve and change to represent this new aspect of us that's more whole and complete in the moment. It does reorder everything. It certainly has reordered everything in my life, and I would venture the guess, if I say to you or ask you the question, did it reorder your life? I would think the answer would be absolutely.
Yes, it did. One of the things that came to me as you were talking is it's sort of like standing on the railroad tracks, and all this stuff that we've been taught to grind on. Let's face it, we learn really quickly that we get a lot of response from angst and worry and fear and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of like standing there waiting for the train to hit you. And all you have to do is decide you're going to move out of the way and change your perspective from looking at the light coming at you, looking at the train going by. And that might be sort of an odd analogy, but that's what just came to me while you were speaking. And it's kind of how it felt to me when I realized that the love that we hear about on the radio and in the songs and in the TV and all that kind of stuff, it's a kind of a second chakra issue. I don't know if you work with chakras or not.
Yes. Yes, I would totally agree, yes.
Right. And the unconditional love that you and I are talking about today has nothing to do with that. It all comes from the heart chakra, from that fourth chakra. And that's where our balance is. That's where our lower self is reaching up to our higher self. And our higher self is reaching down to our lower self. And once we can embrace that, that's where the balance is, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and in fact, that leads into the definition that I actually came to already back in when my first book came out in 93, so I would have written this in 91, 92, when I was really contemplating various aspects of practical ways that, I had come to understand to look at life, things that, I really feel like, should be taught in schools, should be taught in families. These are the things that would have certainly made my life a lot easier had I known of them earlier. But in the exploration, finding them, remembering them, I realized that there wasn't a practical definition for unconditional love. So I set out to just come up with my own, and I took the two words. I started out with love, and I started thinking about how we perceive love, how we describe, define, delineate the notion of love. And as we've mentioned, like, what we hear on the radio, all these second chakra things, and sometimes even base chakra, I love my career, I love my family, I love my car. We attribute love to so many different things, and on rare occasions we have puppy love, and rare occasions we feel a distinct deep love, for another person or for another creature, or possibly even at times for ourselves. This idea that love was a power, was an energy, it was a force within us, it was and is something that we ascribe to, and yet it is so much more than any definition we could really place upon it, because you can't actually show love tangibly in the sense that you can prove it. Just like electricity, we use it, but we don't actually see it to say, well, here's the tangible proof of electricity. Yeah. So love was something that was and is used for physiological, our responses when we're in physical or sexual love with another, or romantic love. I mean, there was just so many and are so many cast-off phrases, but really love ultimately understood as a way of being. And when you add this other part, the word that I love to add to love, because when you add the word unconditional, it changes the vibratory quality of love, because now even though unconditional can be considered a double negative, we're talking about something without condition, without limit. So my definition for unconditional love is an unlimited way of being. And if we can reside in every moment without condition or limitation in our thoughts and feelings, without any other sense of judgment or objective other than to just be, then in the present moment, our sense is unlimited, because anything and everything is possible. When we're not limited by our doubts and our fears, if we're not limited by our angers and our emotions, then we have a very different place to come from. And when we're coming from our unlimited sense where anything's possible, we tap into a vast creative reservoir of potential. And we really can't, most of us cannot fathom just how much potential is there, because we are so constrained by our own created and accepted beliefs and structures that we really don't know who we are. We are generally products of our genealogy, our environment. We accept everything from the external, and what we're talking about here in this program today is about what if we really do go within. What if we do release all of the limitations, release all of the assumptions, the suggestions, everything that we've adopted, and simply go into the core essence of what love is. And in that space, everything is. And that's when it becomes really magical, miraculous, and unbelievable, because that's where we come from, our personal power, a genuine self.
Right. What came to me as you were speaking just then was the visual of the fact that the deeper inside of us we go, the greater the space becomes. And you think about it, you go inside, you're limited, you think you are, by this organ and that organ and the skin that you're in and all that sort of thing, but it doesn't happen that way, does it? As you go deeper,
no, in fact,
the space gets... Even
science will say that the distance between a proton and an electron is football fields. And on that minuscule size, we're talking about infinite space really between two subatomic particles. And so if you think about that, really and understand that we are space, and that space grows according to our awareness of its existence.
The other thing I would say is that as you go deeper and deeper into this unimaginable, vast space that we contain and that we are, all the labels and the walls start to break down and dissolve. And I think that labeling things is one of the biggest mistakes that we make as human beings. I mean, we're taught to do that early on, and we kind of carry that with us. But as we evolve and expand and grow to see things from a different perspective, we realize that those things are just absolutely not needed, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and I think one of the interesting aspects of more recent technology of the last 50, 60 years is that we've had the opportunity, for example, to lift off of our own planet and then take pictures of it as we go away, and where we have been, in these last few thousand years in this construct where here's a border, here's a boundary, here's a wall, here's my space, your space. When you move further away from the planet, you realize there are no boundaries, there are no walls, and it's a good metaphor for the greater existence, because when in fact we move beyond the Earth, we start to look out into the heavens, we realize there are billions of galaxies with trillions of stars. It does get quite vast very quickly. And if we can take that same symbology back into our own self and say the more we let go of the labels, the more we let go of the assumptions, we still function in this world. We don't have to function in quite the same way. Then everything starts to connect differently. In fact, it does start to connect. And the unity and wholeness brings a whole new depth and level of experience on the planet, far more so than, say, the separation, mine and yours, us and them. When you start coming together, everything takes on a much more brilliant hue of beauty.
I agree. One of my favorite words is allowing, and I think as we approach this event horizon that you're talking about, where we can see things for what they are, we can allow them to be what they are. We don't have to judge them. We don't have to label them. We can allow them just to be. And that's one of my favorite things to do during meditation. And what I have discovered over the years of doing that is that it is cascading out into my, I don't want to call it that. I was going to say waking world, but once you're there, you're kind of awake all the time. Everyday life, I guess, would be a good way to put it.
Yes, and allowing is, if you were to kind of singularly put a word out that, what is unconditional love really about? It is about allowing everything to be what it is rather than what we think it is or what we think it should be or what we think people think it should be. In other words, we have, in particularly Western-centric culture, we are particularly hard on ourselves in the sense that we identify so closely with the labels and so closely with the expectations, and don't always have that Oriental philosophy of that deeper chi energy, that deeper interconnectedness. The allowing is allowing ourselves to be first and foremost, allowing what was to be first and foremost, allowing what will be to be first and foremost. In other words, allowing is that catalyst that it's another way that we open up to more and more unconditional love. And then, certainly I gave a very open-ended definition to say unconditional love is an unlimited way of being. And yet as a mantra of...
Hello? Did I lose you? The call's dropped. If you'll hang on a minute, I will see if I can get him back. We were talking about allowing before we had our little glitch there. What would you say is the easiest part of allowing, or is there an easy part, Harold?
Well, one of the ways that, I've come to put the packages together in an understandable format, because there are some, assumptions that we are addressing here about what we have within, we give out, what we give out, we get back. Being in the present moment is that point of power where we have choice. And I think recognizing that we have choice over our thoughts and feelings allows us the opportunity to say, well, that's an interesting thought or interesting suggestion or interesting feeling. How about if I choose a different one? How about if I choose a higher one or a more positive one or something that exemplifies where I am going in my life? And that's the way we can begin to shift these understandings from what was to what is and to what can be. And one of the other...
That would require that we're paying attention to these things, yeah?
Yes, and that is a theme here, and it is something that I wrote a lot about in my very first book. That was probably my most important awakening, and the sense that I didn't have a transcended out of body. I didn't have, thank God, didn't have a near death, because I don't necessarily want to get my awareness. This was a very natural awakening, and certainly what I was responding to were impulses. This idea that I was doing everything right and I wasn't happy. What did I need to do to become happy? So I followed a lot of these inner promptings. And then as I explored through a variety of, powerful and important self-help books, one of the things that I recognized was nobody had ever really told me that I had a choice in any of this, that I had a choice, in external events to a very limited degree, because I was expected to conform, but absolutely no sense of understanding that I had a choice in the way I perceived my own life and what choices I made within my own thoughts and feelings. And so I really built my foundation and awareness on this beginning point of our thoughts and feelings are the best place to start. And the more we become aware of our thoughts and feelings and begin to pay attention, as I used to say in my very early workshops, I would say, out of 60 thoughts in any one moment, I was conscious of probably less than 10. 5 might have been more obvious. I was having thoughts all day long, but I simply was following all these programs. Well, when I became conscious of my thoughts and I started to pay diligent attention to my thoughts and my feelings, I reversed that trend to where I was, and do spend the vast majority of my time being aware, again, in the allowing state, not judgmentally, not, this is the right thought or a wrong thought or a right emotion or a wrong feeling. These just are. and I have the opportunity to let them float by and choose. And in many ways, you mentioned the word meditation. In many ways, I went from those early stages of doing meditation to letting my life become a walking meditation, where I simply am in the world and simultaneously an observer of my world, so that I can be attentive to the holistic part. And that really is, I think a powerful place for a lot of people to become aware of these understandings. Because one of the other things that was very different in my world is that, yes, I had, I had certain dramas that, anyone growing up, we were faced with, various levels of drama that we deal with. Well, in my case, I can actually say that my upbringing was quite nice, and, my parents were very loving and very caring, and, certainly there were lots of certain types of issues, but no major physical abuse, verbal abuse, a lot of things that people may identify with. As I looked at my own life, though, by high school time, I was very borderline suicidal because I had so little self-esteem, self-worth. So no matter how good my overall upbringing was, I still had a lot of shame, doubt, guilt, worry, fear, embarrassments, things that just had no reconciliation. And I have had this experience over the years that I think we hear so much about the dramas and the traumas and the extremes, but in fact there are a lot of people that have lived almost what we could say more ordinary lives, and yet they don't have the self-esteem, they don't have the self-worth, they have no self-understanding. It's not that they don't want to, there have been no mechanisms to instill this and to reconnect ourselves to ourselves, which is why, individuals like you and I are doing what we're doing, is right, to share very practical ways for people to reconnect with themselves and then really evolve and grow their personal experience, because then it actually affects not only their lives, but it has these ripple effects everywhere on the planet. And so the lives of all of us get better as we get and do the individual, awareness and forgiving and letting go and allowing and loving, as we do it for ourselves, there's a ripple effect that the world itself becomes a better place for everyone to live in.
I always tell my students and clients, you don't know until you know, And that knowing, that understanding, that coming into, and my favorite phrase for this is coming into conscious awareness of what is actually going on in your biology as you have these thoughts, in your biology as you have these feelings, because one amps up the other one. And once you do become consciously aware of what is going on inside you as a person, and you do take those steps like you were talking about to recreate these thoughts, change these thoughts and feelings, and examine not so much exactly why they're there, but what can you do to make them better. I think you're absolutely right. This is going to cascade out through your entire person. Your energy changes, your outlook changes, your perspective changes, everything changes. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. I guess it could. Most people it doesn't. They have to kind of bumble around and find their way. But once it starts to happen, it's not as bumblesome, and you stop walking into walls, right?
Right. In fact, the question, do I love myself unconditionally, for example, when I ask myself that, and I came to my own awareness, absolutely, of course, why would I not? Of course, this is me having gone through some purging and some releasing and some forgiving and letting go before I came to that level of conclusion where the idea of unconditional love was so, again, outside the scope of potential. What I did by answering that question for myself in that particular moment, in other words, that was the moment where I could consciously choose to love myself unconditionally, which means in this physical reality, in this linear reality, at least once in my lifetime, I had accepted myself unconditionally, which means now it was part of my memory, which was part of my history, which meant it also took this idea of this lofty notion of unconditional love being something outside of me, above me, beyond me, part of some divine nature, some aspect that was really disconnected from me. And literally, by having that choice to say, yes, I love myself unconditionally, that became my foundation for my life. I realize, well, I've accepted myself once in this lifetime. I can keep accepting myself over and over and over again, any and all times that I seem to stray away from whatever I think that unconditional love is for me. And in certain ways, it's another kind of cute metaphor or way of saying it is I'm perfecting itself. You know, people say, well, once you do that, you're always going to be like that. Well, yes, you are, because it's a part of who I am. It's an intrinsic part of my psyche, my consciousness now. It's an intrinsic part of how I approach life. That doesn't mean that in any one given day, certain circumstances, certain opportunities, certain events, certain individuals, scenarios, whatever they may be, will cross my path, and for a brief moment, I will forget unconditional love. The difference is that, you know, in the earliest stages, sometimes that reconciliation could take 6 weeks. For the most part now, because it is my life mantra, my life focus, I can recognize when some part of me comes up with a judgment or something that would be conditional, would not necessarily be all that unconditional, and the reconciliation time is in moments. In other words, I can see almost simultaneously, wow, there's the judgment and there's the non-judgment. And then I have the opportunity to choose, well, do I want to stay in judgment or do I want to choose non-judgment? So yes, as a life evolution, we still encounter experiences that will give us opportunity to say, well, maybe this isn't as unconditional as you are wanting to be, and since you already have it as a base foundation of your life, here's 2 perspectives or 5 perspectives or 100 perspectives. Now, which one do you choose? So there, you know, as I say, it's not even a goal anymore because it is just a part of me. It becomes part of the walking of life where I can look around and have my experiences. And the more I stay in that unconditional love, the freer I am to have a more full embodied experience in whatever it is I'm doing. And the more capable I am of saying, I feel complete with this experience, now I choose to go to that experience. And so for my life, I can say, you know, and particularly in the last 25 years, as I do this essentially every moment of every day, things that I really aspired to in, say, the early 90s are essentially non-existent in my consciousness now because I never had to have those, because as I began to understand more of myself, I started to find a truer connection with myself and the world around me. And the way I kind of like to share this is that, say, in the early, you know, coming out of the 80s, the business world and the banking world and the schooling and everything was very materially oriented. That was the momentum of that train was on the materialism path. So in my early travels around the United States, for example, you know, it was always fun to go to the newest shop, the newest mall, the newest store, you know, be in cities. And over the decade, that waned. And what I found is that I started to explore more of nature. And where, say, at one point I would have loved to live in a city, then it became I would love to live outside a city looking at the city. Then it became I want to look outside the city and not even look at the city, you know, the night lights. I want to be out looking at nature. So, you know, where I am right now, that's essentially what is manifested is, you know, like where we live at the moment. I still love materialism and the material things that are in my world, but I find that I resonate very clearly and closely, that I notice nature constantly in the crack in the sidewalk as well as in the forest by my house. So for me, nature wasn't a prominent part in those early years. And the more I got connected to me, the more all of me merged and emerged into something very different than, you know, I had been for, say, the first half of my life.
My husband always says when we start talking like you were just bringing up, here we stand on the cutting edge of ancient wisdom.
Absolutely. Timeless truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's nothing new here. That, of course, is one of the more you know, amazing things is that this is, you know, it is timeless. It is ancient wisdom. It is the way it is naturally. In fact, the more natural we become with ourselves, the more we understand the natural order of things. Right. And our place alongside it and within it and around it. And, you know, things I can say for me, you know, in doing everything externally focused, nothing made sense. I didn't know that. I knew something was amiss, but I didn't really know that until I started self-exploration, when I started to put the pieces together, and one of the things that I touched on a little bit ago was I looked at a lot of self-help genres, modalities at the time, and they were all incredible in their own right. And back in that time period, positive thinking was very popular. The inner child was very popular. Creative visualization was popular. And so I explored all of them. But what I found was that, there were books by numerous authors on each subject, but nobody put it all together. So I ended up saying, well, I'm seeing these interconnections. So for me, the first book I wanted to write was my exploration of how all these pieces fit together like a beautiful puzzle. And I think that, too, was a founding premise that I built everything else on, and looking at things in a unified whole rather than all its separate pieces. I think we needed perhaps to look at things separately, as a civilization on this planet, but now we've gotten it to such a point that the separation no longer serves because we've gotten to the point where we've forgotten that we're all interconnected and interdependent. And so now we're coming together.
I had the exact same thought process when I was creating Evolution of Self, and that's basically what that's all about. It's how to take all these bits and pieces and put the puzzle back together and get a balance in your body, mind, and spirit that brings all of this conscious awareness about. And I think you're absolutely right. We are to the place now that the separation no longer serves anyone.
No, it really doesn't. And it is something that we each are provided opportunities to take. People that are listening in on your audience today, they're drawn by an inner inspiration to hear today's message, for example. There are plenty of people out there that, are not drawn to this, or if they're drawn to it, they're not necessarily acting upon it, whatever may be happening. But for the ones that are, I think, your work or my work, the things that we're here to share is this very practical, grounded understanding that this isn't something esoteric. It's not something outside of ourselves. It's not woo-woo. It's not, certainly with my very logical, I can conceptualize it, because of my background. And yet, in that conceptualization, it helps me, or it has helped me, for the understanding so that my exploration can go beyond conceptualization and actually into the greater expansion of the conscious awareness of it, so that, conceptualization gets me to the point where I can then have a deeper experience with it all. And I think one of the beautiful messages that a lot of us are sharing now is that, hey, we've been walking this and we've been, finding this out for ourselves, remembering it for ourselves, and in order to shorten the time between initial inspiration to recognition to, actually embodying this, I think we're all sharing our insights so that we can make other individuals' pathways shorter and faster so that they can get to that relative understanding without having to go through all the many things that I'm sure you've gone through and I know I've gone through in order to have these realizations so that we can actually get our beautiful planet onto the right track and the right way, doing the right things, because we can all live together, we can all play together, we can all, we can still have our diversity, we can still have our beautiful traditions, but they can all sit side by side. They don't need to be separate. They can learn from each other. We can grow from each other. It's really not that difficult, especially from our perspective. I think it's not that difficult.
It's that coexisting thing. You were using a very important word back before the break. It was choices. And I would like to talk a little bit about our choices and why choosing is so important in this evolution of ourselves, of this self-enlightenment, however you want to look at it. What would you say about choices?
Well, choice was actually, it's the beginning part of the first book I wrote because it was that fundamental. It was that big of a difference to me, was this recognition that I actually had choice, that my thoughts and coupled with my feelings create my outer world. And the metaphor I kind of use is that, for anyone listening to the show, for example, they might be sitting on a chair or on a couch, sitting in a room, and the way I quickly help people understand that is, the room that we're sitting in as we're listening to this show. That room, it's a series of material, items, woods, plasters, windows, glass, furniture, woods, carpeting, before it was that room, what was it? Before it was that room, it was really a series of materials and some labor and some manufacturing. What was it before that? And understanding there's a method to this is that before it was that room, it was ultimately a blueprint. Somebody had the idea that they want to build that apartment, that room, that house, wherever somebody's at right now. They had this idea that they wanted to build this structure. So in that initial idea of that blueprint was the first level of imagination, that creation, that idea. I choose to build this room, this chair, whatever that somebody's going to eventually sit on and sit in. And if you take that initial imaginative impulse, I want to build a house or I want to build an apartment that has this particular room in it, and someone has that initial impulse and stays with it long enough. In other words, says, this isn't just a momentary, I think there should be a house there. This is like, no, I really choose to build this house. That choice has to have, that thought has to have feeling. The more we have feeling with something, the more we stay with a thought and an idea and give it more and more feeling, the more it comes into manifestation. So the reason why choice is so pivotal and so fundamentally important to understand is that we're doing this every day. If we're not paying attention to our choices, that doesn't mean that those choices aren't manifesting in one way or another. They are still manifesting. We're just not participating in the choice part. We're just allowing whatever willy-nilly suggestions, responses, traditions, whatever we're doing, things are manifesting. So for me to recognize that if I pay attention to my thoughts and feelings, I can actually come closer to understanding what I actually choose. And when I recognize that I have choice, this is something that I can shift. Like, for example, I'm sure years and years ago, I'd stand in a line if somebody, at a store, if somebody started to grouse about something about how the line wasn't moving fast, I'd probably have chimed in or at least, somehow thought I should participate in the conversation. Mm-hmm. Fast forward these days, if I encounter that, either I stay very silent and just start loving everyone around me because I realize everyone's there, or I engage in a more loving, different conversation so that the energy can go to a different place. And the difference was before not having any clue and probably just participating out of simply being there and having no recognition, to this realization that I can choose to participate in negativity, for example, or I can choose to participate in something higher and more holistic and more universal. And that choice, again, is one of those things over time I've learned to incorporate choice in every aspect of my being. So thoughts, feelings, my imagination, my manifestation, the things that come along in my life that I don't expect, that may or may not be quite what I was, anticipating. I have a choice to my action and my reaction, and that is groundbreaking of an understanding when you realize that we're no longer completely at the whim of our outer circumstances. We actually can and do have a lot more involvement than we've been given ourselves both credit and opportunity for.
And the other thing I would say is that it's okay to do that. A lot of times
yes.
we don't give our permission to make these choices, and so I'm just going to jump right in and say it's okay to make these choices. It's okay to make these decisions, and it's okay to realize that you have them. And I think the realization that A, you have choices, and B, that you can act on them in positive and uplifting ways is what's going to get us where we need to go, yeah?
Yes, and there is a caveat to all of this that I think, in order to share the most wisdom that we can, is that when we do start to make our own personal choices, there is a fairly strong potential. And again, it doesn't have to happen to everyone quite this way, but there's this fairly strong potential when we start to choose our own thoughts and feelings, we start to disengage with the experiences around us. And not everyone else around us may understand or fully appreciate the fact that we're now making our own choices. So there can be the odd sense of chaos and a bit of difficulty that can ensue, and that is the caveat, that is the footnote, that not all of this is always that rosy, that in fact, we make it sound so easy. After years of play and practice, it is. But in those initial stages, and when we do start to kind of disconnect from the external psyche and you realize, well, I'm not going to play this game the way you're playing it. I choose to play it differently. Those that have relied on us to play the game their way with them don't always have the best first reaction, which gives us, an opportunity to go ever deeper and say, wow, I thought I was unconditionally loving. Boy, do I need to go a little deeper now? So yes, it is a bit of footnote there that we do need to recognize that when we start to make these choices, it does shift our reality and our experience within the reality, and some of the things that were seemingly working well, may very well fall apart, and new ones will form. That's a good note, is that new ones that support your new choices will come together. But we do have to, it's kind of like when you're moving out of one house into another. There is a point of where you disassemble everything from the interior of a house, and it's in total chaos. And eventually you recreate the next house, and you begin to furnish it the way you wish to.
Great point.
Choice is kind of like that. It will cause a bit of chaos for a moment, but just know it's temporary, and it's leading you to the right space that you're choosing to step into next. Was that a good caveat?
Yes, that was wonderful. And you're right. As we grow into these choices and these things that we have consciously and awarely created, these new thought patterns, these new ways to respond, these new ways to act rather than just unconsciously react, and they become part of our life, we kind of do forget that, there was that stumbling period where we had to break down the walls and people were looking at us funny and all of that. But again, I tell our listeners that that's okay. That's the way it works. And if you make a wrong choice, here's the beauty of it. You can always make another one. You can correct your course at any time. And just because it's making people look at you funny doesn't necessarily mean that you need to change it now. You need to find what resonates with you and what gives you that internal, unconditional love for you, your choice, and the path you're on. Wouldn't you say, Harold?
Yes, and this is something that the self-exploration, there's an innate determination to weather all these shifts and changes. In other words, I think the exploration uncovers a potential and a vastness that becomes very intriguing, far more intriguing than the accumulation of material manifestations in of themselves, which often leave us wanting by the time we're done. That will carry us through the shifts and changes and challenges. And liken it to another way, life is somewhat circular. It's also somewhat spiral. And over the years, I've certainly encountered what appears to be a circle. Oh, I thought I was done with that. Now it's back again. But it always comes back in a different cast of characters, a slightly different format. And in the spiraling up, in a way, of our consciousness from base externalization to a deep internal realization, that spiral up will not only narrow, it will always be different. So if we keep encountering certain things, somewhat cyclically, know that they're just helping us to resolve or solve or choose differently, and that they will too pass, and we do, move into more and more of the things we choose. And again, this path really has nothing to do with anybody outside of ourselves. It really has to do with our own sense of inner guidance, our own sense of inner wisdom, our own sense of inner heartfelt, experiences that we're literally, me example. I can say in the 80s, I had absolutely no clue that I would be doing the things that I was doing. No aspiration specifically for any of the things, or much less that I had any qualification skills to write books or be on TV or do any of these types of things, much less, a nonprofit, for example, that has an international connection. These weren't things that were on my radar on any level. And yet by choosing to look at my life differently, that unfolding path really, not only did I get out of the way of whatever existing train was on, whatever track I was on, I stepped several over and started on a different journey. As we say, like when you leave port, if you leave port 1 degree from where your initial compass heading is, by the time you go thousands of miles, you're very far from your original destination. Well, I changed tracks. I changed that compass setting just ever so slightly, and where I'm going is extraordinarily different than where I set out, the beginning part of my life. And
Absolutely.
for me, it's been so much more fascinating, so much more interesting. There's so many different aspects of life that had I stayed on the original track, I would have done the habitual mundane. I would have made all the right choices and been miserably unhappy by the time I was done. And for me, that would have just been doing what has always been done. And I see in other people, even my own sibling, I can see where she continued on the same train track that she was on when she left for college and really never deviated from that. And her life is very much the way my home life would have been back in those college days, whereas mine has just gone off in a completely different direction and an exploration very differently than I had ever anticipated. And I found that I had abilities that I never would have dreamed I had, that I was able to actually explore because I wasn't limiting myself as, well, I can't do that. Well, I might not be able to do it at the moment, but I certainly can give it a good old-fashioned try and see what happens, and then how you move forward.
Sounds like you're talking about my life, because I never expected to be where I am on very many different levels, and I'm constantly surprised by the next thing that comes up, and I'm always looking forward to that. We're about out of time, Harold, but before we go, I would like for you to, if you have one, give our listeners a salient point to take away from today's conversation, something that they can really use for mind fodder to maybe help them step onto this new path and start looking for their new choices.
Sure. The one that comes to mind is that whether you recognize it or not, in this particular moment, you are loved, lovable, and loving. That there really is nothing greater than who you are right now, and that no matter what you face, there's so much more that you are that you can't even fathom at this moment. That recognition of potential is what allows us to grow into more of our own personal potential. So even if we don't understand or can't perhaps say, I answer the question, do I love myself unconditionally? And if we can't say absolutely yes, know that it's okay. The question is enough. The intention is enough, because the intention will draw the answer to that question. And the intention will bring you to all the right, perfect circumstances to where you'll just naturally realize that, of course, I wonder why I didn't do this sooner.
And before I let you go, would you please give everybody your contact information, and don't worry about missing it, because it will be posted with the show, so you can copy and paste it, but I want to let you have the opportunity to tell them where they can find you.
Sure. The easiest ways, direct connections, are the website, thelovefoundation.com, thelovefoundation.com, and also internalinsights.com. We do check all of our emails regularly, and I do get them in regular fashion. And then, of course, we're on all the major social networks. I am personally, and then, of course, we have the Love Foundation and all our various groups and programs out there on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Google Plus and Instagram and Pinterest. And we even have an office in the virtual world of Second Life. So if you ever want to meet in a virtual world, we actually have, our foundation has an office out in the virtual world too. So we're very reachable. All you have to do is Google the Love Foundation or Google my name, and you'll find the right contacts. So we do certainly appreciate it, and always happy to assist in any ways we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Harold, for being on the show. I know you've given everybody a lot to think about, and I think that's wonderful. I want to thank my lovely listeners for joining us for the show. And if you'd like to send me a question or a suggestion for a topic that you'd like covered on the show, please send your question, your suggestion, or your request to me at chessieroberts.com. You can find all of my information, my classes and everything, services and all that at chessieroberts.com. And for those of you who are not aware, it's all now by donation. I have no price points whatsoever. And so if you have any questions, you can contact me there. My music is at archersmeadow.com. That's that intriguing intro and outro that we have for the show. That's part of it. And you can investigate us there and listen to us and share us and buy us. And I encourage you to do that. And my book is on Amazon.com. Just go on and put my name in the browser bar, and I'll pop right up. So thank you for listening, and come back anytime to hear Get on the Grid with Chessie Robert. Great time until I see you again. Bright blessings. Bye-bye.